I will start off with some announcements. First announcement is that Defund SFPD Now will be having a community care event in Dolores Park. It's going to be on Sunday, November 14th from 1 to 4 p.m. And our class will have a table there. So if you want to help coordinate that, you can post and reach out in the Discord in the community gatherings channel. So catch the tabling there. Another announcement, the CCSF Board of Trustees will have their general meeting this Thursday at 3 p.m. And the Zoom link and agenda will be found in a link that I'm going to paste right now, if you want to take a look. And these meetings are open to everyone. People are encouraged to give public comment, to not have the aircraft maintenance and technology program be relocated to the Evans campus, as it causes environmental damage and harm to the Bayview community. For today's topic, it's going to be the academic industrial complex. We are joined by Debbie Klein from the Faculty Association of California Community Colleges. And Debbie will discuss the academic industrial complex and the corporate agenda on California community colleges and how this is connected to abolition. My name is Jai. You can call me Troy. It's spelled T-R-O-I, and I use she, her pronouns. I do a little bit of work here and there, a lot of work with APINC, who is going to speak at one of our future events soon, and also be a lead in so-called Philadelphia. And visual description, I am a lighter skinned Vietnamese person with dark, short black hair. I'm wearing a striped shirt and a black jacket. Behind me is a bookcase full of memorabilia. Yeah, and I'll pass it to Era to introduce herself.
Thanks, Jai. So my name is Era. I'm joining Jai in the co-facilitating of this session, and my pronouns are she, her. I have long black hair. I'm also a lighter skinned Vietnamese person, also from the Chinese diaspora. I'm wearing earrings, have a red lip on, and a red sweater. I'm also able-bodied, and I'm one of the student coordinators of this session. I'm looking forward to hearing more about the academic industrial complex. And with that said, I'm also doing like the screen sharing and the Zoom hosting. But we want to acknowledge that San Francisco is located on the unceded ancestral land of the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples, who are the original inhabitants of the SF Peninsula. So we encourage non-Indigenous members to uplift the work of repatriation and land taxes. You will get a link to the donation page in the chat. We also want to be mindful of how we're creating Black and Indigenous or people of color centered spaces. So we want to do practices such as when we move into our Q&A session, we want to prioritize BIPOC voices, primarily those that are LGBTQ+ and disabled. And then in the last 5 minutes of our Q&A session, it will be open to non-BIPOC speakers. So just be mindful of like how we are creating spaces and centering the right voices. We also have a mutual aid fundraiser. Thank you to everyone that has donated. I know a bulk of it has came from our cohort members themselves. And please do continue to donate because we're providing $50 stipends to our speakers, prioritizing Black and Indigenous folks first. We are also doing a fundraising event. So those that want to participate with other cohort members in doing a art auction, please let me know, or even mention it in the Discord and we could get around to coordinating that. One other aspect of this course is how we're centering collective care. For every session we have, or even just outside of the session, we have a forum that's available for cohort members to just share any feedback and welcome anything to be shared, because we want to create a space that is very transparent, and this class is meant to be created or co-created with all of us. And Tiara and Kari are those that are in charge of collective care, and Tiara and Kari, I'm not sure if you're in the space right now. I see that they're not, but then typically Tiara and Kari will give an update on collective care, and if folks that are in this cohort haven't filled out the format, please do so if you can. Thank you. All right, and with that, we're going to move forward with Debbie, who will be discussing the academic industrial complex.
I am a light-skinned woman of mixed heritage, Jewish, Welsh, and Serbian. I have chin-length red hair, and I'm wearing a black jacket with some blue design on it. And my background is a bookcase and a drum set and an exercise bike that's covered up with a cloth. So, yeah. I also wanted to just, from my heart, thank Era, Sean, and Gracie for inviting me, and also for taking the time to have multiple conversations with me about your course and about how to think of the academic industrial complex as an abolitionist. So I'm so grateful to be here. And I wanted to say a few words about myself and how I kind of got to be able to talk about this topic, if I may. And I promise not to go on and on, but I just wanted to let you know why I'm here. So like I said, I come from a mixed heritage Jewish family from New York. I grew up in Tampa, Florida in the 70s and 80s. I identify as queer. Growing up in Florida, I experienced anti-Jewish targeting, and I'm a survivor of a lineage of people who were persecuted for being different. As I learned my history and participated in my communities, I developed a fire in my belly for freedom and a calling to eradicate all forms of structural violence and to hold the oppressors accountable. As I grew older, I wanted to be part of the fight for racial, gender, class, and educational justice, which is what eventually led me to the California community colleges, where I'm a faculty. I teach anthropology at Gavilan College in Gilroy, where I've been for 17 years now. And I'm a proud faculty member there. During my term as FACCC president, which is the statewide organization I was ahead of for 2 years, I was sitting at so many tables watching how the corporate agenda is heavily influencing our state chancellor's office, our board of governors, and our legislature, basically the academic industrial complex in action. And it was so upsetting and sort of shocking to me to be in those rooms. And I kept asking anyone who would listen, why is our system more interested in working with philanthrocapitalists groups who have nothing to do with our system, never even were students in our system, then collaborating with our own students and our system practitioners like me, those of us who are dedicated to our system. So why is the focus also now on full-time transfer students who are so few of our students in total? And why are the faculty being painted as the enemy? It's just, what was going on here? And I was asking these questions for 2 years, and basically I had to do my own homework, and that became the genesis of this presentation that I'm hopefully, that I'm sharing with you today, and hopefully make some sense out of this. So I do think we're kind of going through an existential crisis as a system, which requires our collective strategizing and action. And I'm wondering, how can we put the community back into our community colleges and fully support each and every one of our students as you all define and pursue your unique educational goals? And I'm excited for our conversation on that this evening, and anything else you want to talk about, please feel free to jump in anytime and ask questions, unmute yourself. I've asked Era and Troy to help me monitor the chat, so your comments are always welcome. And with that, I think I'll just start screen sharing my slides, if that's all right, Era. All right, here we go. Can you all see that okay? Oh, let me do this. Let me get it to, there we go. All right. So I titled this presentation, our crisis is their plan, because I'm sure that the kinds of crises we're in now, right now we're in an enrollment crisis, we're in a funding crisis. That is absolutely the intention of this academic industrial complex, or what I'm going to be calling the reform movement. They've intended to shrink us and make us really struggle, which is what we're going through right now. And so I'm hopefully going to explain how we got to this place of crisis. And then I wanted to point out the two books I have here, Free City and Slaying Goliath, are books that really informed my information that I'm presenting here tonight, among other things that I'll mention as I go. So I thought it would be fun and kind of important to start out asking you all a question of reflection, which is in the spirit of figuring out, well, how did we get here? Why now? Why are we here? I thought I would ask us all to think of what our own core values are around education, whatever those may be. So when somebody talks about education, or you're thinking of your own path, what values come to mind? And I thought I would go through some things I came up with, but I want to invite you all to put your values or your thoughts in the chat while I'm going through these, and then we'll say a few out loud, and I'll also open the floor to hear your voices if you would like. So a few things I came up with for us to think about is, we are in a battle with the academic industrial complex for the soul of public education. And I know you all have been talking about, I believe, the academic industrial complex, but one way to define it is down here on my slide at the bottom: profit-driven relationship between public institutions, private companies, and what I'm going to be calling philanthrocapitalists organizations. The AIC transforms students into customers, administrators into CEOs, campuses into marketplaces, and colleges into degree factories. So really, that's we're battling, I know, with this big interconnected complex. The other value that a couple others I wanted to bring up is the value of education as a human right, not something that we have to get broke paying for or even pay for, except through our investments in our people, the people's money, our taxes. Learning is a path to liberation. Education is freedom. The corporate agenda of privatization, anti-labor, austerity, and disinvesting from the public good is shutting out students. Disinvesting from the largest and most diverse system of higher education in the nation, who is our system, this community colleges, is systemic racism and classism. Abolitionist struggle will reclaim and reinvent life-affirming education and combat austerity measures and structures of violence like policing. So those are a few values I wanted to start off with, and I would love to hear what you all are coming up with. And Era and Troy, if you could let me know what's in the chat, since I'm not able to see it right now.
Currently there Era put self-determination and accessible liberatory education, a focus on a learning space that focuses on how diverse learning truly is. Neurodivergency and care.
Beautiful.
Sean put accessibility. Jacqueline put one of my values, education as a tool to help liberate myself and others. And some folks are really resonating.
Thank you so much, everyone. I so appreciate all those wise, beautiful words and thoughts, and keep them coming. I'm so sorry I can't see the chat. It's just I only have one screen. So thank you, Troy, for helping us out. So I thought, but as I get started here, it's really a great idea to define the problem. What's going on here? And one way I define it is that we are being taken over by this, quote, reform movement. And what I would say is that the education reform movement has been defunding and shrinking the California community colleges for decades now, or disinvesting from, it would probably be a better way to put that. The Chancellor's Office, which is the regulatory body of our whole system, all 116 colleges, the Board of Governors, which governs all of us, and our own legislature are heavily influenced by this reform agenda. And while it's true that a resistance movement to this has been winning and building in the K-12 system, which is awesome, and I'll talk about that, not yet at all in the community colleges. So I think that's part of something we can, we can derive some hope from that and hopefully learn from the lessons. And I wanted to mention who some of these reformers are. The big ones are Lumina and Gates. And some of you probably know who these folks are, but I thought I would just mention that Lumina is the largest foundation focused on US higher education. And it was entirely funded in 2001 when it began by the Student Loan Marketing Corporation. And the Student Loan Marketing Corporation also funded our own Student Success Task Force, which basically set into motion the policy that has been shrinking our system back in 2012. And also Lumina has been funding our own accrediting body, which is called ACCJC, which has also given City College of San Francisco a lot of problems over the years. So all of these kind of issues that we have go back to the funding of Lumina. And then the Gates Foundation is the largest private foundation in the world. It was the chief architect of the Common Core, which is the K-12 curriculum that is now being dismantled, thankfully. Also standardized testing in K-12, which is also finally going away. And then online modalities that create demand for private products like Microsoft hardware and software. So we have these philanthrocapitalist organizations. They're philanthropists, but they also are really making money for the corporations. And so the two are linked, which is why the term philanthrocapitalism. Problems is that there's been a shift from teachers like me to tech. And there's a great article that I put down here on the bottom of the slide by Roxana Marachi and Robert Carpenter from San Jose State. And basically, tech and philanthropy sectors are driving policy shifts from human relational campus-based learning to anytime, anywhere, digitized content and assessments. And there's so many examples of this. And basically, the chat bots and bots are cheaper than humans. And so they're replacing faculty and counselors as we speak. Learning management systems and software are extracting student data in the name of equity, and that includes Canvas, which we all use in our system. And then tech and philanthropy sectors are dehumanizing and depersonalizing and undermining genuine efforts at equity and access. For example, the disinvestment in the faculty, from the faculty, not hiring any full-time faculty anymore, over relying on part-time faculty who are exploited in our system and who are 70% of the faculty in our system. So just a little history, not too much because of time, but I thought I would mention the 1960 Master Plan for Higher Education in California. And this Time magazine cover, if you were around in 1960, which I wasn't, it was before my time, but you see this cover and it was all about this revolutionary public higher education system in California. And the revolutionary part of it was that it was free. It was free, high quality education for anyone in California. And the idea was that it's a human right. And UC was free, CSU was free, and the community colleges were free. And my teachers at UC Santa Cruz, a lot of them benefited from this and went to UC for free. So it wasn't that long ago. So back then as well, though, I should say that even then, our system, it was created to serve any adult in the state of California who can benefit from a higher education, anyone and everyone, come one, come all, open access. And it's in our system suffered and still suffers from the lowest per student funding, but we serve the largest population with the highest need. So that's just an injustice and inequity baked in from the beginning. In the 1970s was when we had this neoliberal economics kind of take over, which was about disinvesting from the public good. And we're still dealing with that today, of course. And in 1978, we had Prop 13, which restricted property tax increases for corporations. And so we have the most wealthy corporations not paying their fair share of taxes, which would benefit our system and our students if they did. And I could say a lot more about that, but I'll keep myself going. In the 1980s, we had Reaganism and more deregulation and privatization and anti-unionism, and then the origin of this reform movement in public education or in education. And so just skipping forward a little bit, in 2012 and 2016, we did have millionaires taxes, which helped to fund our system, but it wasn't enough, and our system is still struggling for lack of funding. And basically, this concept you probably heard of called austerity, it became the dominant reformer ideology. And what this means for our system is that our system's mission has completely shrunk, and nobody agreed to shrink it, but it was the reformer policies that shrunk it. So we used to be, our mission as written in that educational master plan is to serve lifelong learners, basic skills, strong workforce, and transfer students. Now we are such a narrow, we're focusing in on get in, get out, transfer students, and basically 20% or less of our students. And we are shrinking enrollment because we are prioritizing first-time, full-time students. And we are the powers that be are complaining about enrollments, but the policies have driven us to this point. And we are also shrinking our educational and course options. So the concept of education for developing human capital, workers for a market, but not for our students growing in knowledge and critical thinking and character and civic engagement. So this very narrow concept of what our system is supposed to be here for. And as a very, I think, clear example of this shrinkage that we're talking about here is this, line graph. And so on the left-hand side, what this is City College's enrollment headcount, just the numbers of students. So for the last two decades. So back here in 2000, you see City College had above 90,000 students. It hit a peak here in 2008 at 100,000 students, one of the largest community colleges of the 116. And that was a crisis point because we had that credit crisis, all those loans and the housing market crashing. And that was a crisis that the reformers took advantage of. They swept in the style of disaster capitalism and started to pass their policies and say, you know, we can't afford to serve all these students. We have to change the policies. And they did that. And what happened was we've been shrinking in enrollment ever since. And in City College's case, it's devastating. City College is around 50,000 students, so half of what City College should be serving. It's really tragic. And although I want to be hopeful that we can reverse this trend. And then the population of San Francisco has been steadily climbing. So you can't make the argument that, well, there's fewer and fewer adults, so of course the population is going to shrink. That's absolutely not the case. And then the big view is of the whole system. The same trend is happening. So you could see these policies of shrinking have been successful. So we had 2.6+ million in 2000. We reached a high up here at 2.9 million students. That's amazing. And now we're hovering around 2.1 million. So 12+ % decline in enrollment, which was absolutely the intention of these policies. And of course, the California population is increasing. So there's no reason why we can't be serving the amount of students we used to serve. So a couple notes about terminology, just to be super clear. Why I put reform in quotes is that it's not really about reform, it's about disrupting. And the author Diane Ravitch likes to use the term corporate disruption. And what she talks about is that these disruption groups have intentionally derailed public education. They want to, basically get rid of public education and privatize us. And so what she says is that they demonize the faculty. Their goal is to privatize public education. They want to lower taxes and government spending. They want to demolish the principle that education is a public good. They want people to have to pay for their own education. That's the whole privatization thing. And they want to just disrupt for the sake of disrupting. And so, sorry for the long quote, but I thought this was important because if we're going to be talking about corporatization and neoliberalism, I thought it would be great to just get on the same page on what those things mean. And this is a quote from an article that Era sent me, which I love, called Neoliberalism in the Academic Industrial Complex by Jason Delgandio. And here's the quote: "Corporatizing higher education is socially unjust and morally unethical. Neoliberalism plays a major role in corporatizing higher education. Neoliberalism is a form of global capitalism based on the deregulation of free markets and the privatization of wealth. The basic purpose of neoliberalism is to allow private interests to own and control every aspect of the human, social, and natural world. Things like food, water, farmland, forests, healthcare, prisons, militaries, political processes, mass media, and of course, education are targets of neoliberal control. While most colleges are still nonprofit institutions, their primary function is to serve the neoliberal enterprise." And then this quote from Free City really brings it home to our system and the reform agenda. The national reform agenda pushed in all 50 states equates student success with the rapid completion of transfer degrees and certificates. The push for full-time attendance squeezes out students who cannot go full-time, students who are not necessarily headed toward the corporate workforce, and those who need and want education for other reasons, such as lifelong learners. So that kind of hopefully reinforces some of what I was just trying to lay out for everyone. Now I wanted to just mention who is this network of folks driving this reform agenda. Well, it is vast and it is powerful and interconnected. And so on this kind of roadmap or snake, I put the players. So we have our very own, at the very top, the US Department of Education pushing this agenda. Under Biden, it remains to be seen, but it's still, it still seems as though the reform agenda is at play, alive and well in the Biden administration. Philanthrocapitalist foundations, think tanks, advocacy organizations, professional associations, these are all part of the reform agenda or the corporate agenda. ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council, some of you may have heard of that. That was founded in 1973 by the Koch brothers to write and push pro-corporate model state legislation. So ALEC has all this education reform bill language. They just give out to all the 50 states. So it's boilerplate language. The government, our state governments are behind the reform agenda. Jerry Brown was, and now Gavin Newsom is being compelled by reform policy. And then across the parties, the political parties, so Republican, Democrat, the corporate media. So it's a big network. And then who stands to gain? The student loan industry. The push for full-time attendance drives students into debt. The ed tech industry, companies known as online program managers. For example, the Gates Foundation is the architect of online modalities that are creating a demand for Microsoft. For-profit colleges, they cost up to 17 times as much as community colleges. And if we are shutting out students, which we are, where do you think our students are headed? They're headed to for-profits that have these great loans, but the loans have to be paid back. And it's this way of keeping us in debt. And then rich people who don't want to invest in the public good by paying their fair share of taxes. And then some examples of reform policies. There are many more than just these, but these are some big ones in the last decade that have really shifted our system. And I definitely won't talk about all of them, but I wanted to mention that this 2012 Student Success Act kind of got the ball rolling and started shrinking everything that we're about. And FACC, that organization that I am with, we fought like crazy against this and we lost that fight. But the same person who was heading up this task force, Amy Supinger, was a Lumina employee at the time. Now she has her own consulting agency. She was being funded by Lumina and then also was responsible for creating this vision for success. She's a co-author of it, which is our, quote, North Star for our system right now. So we have Lumina behind our direction of our system, among other organizations. And speaking of which, when I was doing the job of FACC, I was sitting at the table or in the testimony rooms with these groups. And these are 9 groups, and I chose them because they were the ones who were most active among, like I was with a faculty group, but these groups would show up in their suits and ties and blazers and make really corporate arguments and win the day. And it was very frustrating. And not all of these groups are not only focused on education. Some of them are focused on some great things outside of education, I should say. But when it comes to education, it's all about the reform agenda. And then I was doing my homework and found out that who is funding these organizations, these philanthrocapitalist organizations, but the same people, the same funders who have the same agenda. Lumina, Gates, the James Irvine Foundation, ECMC, the Hewlett Foundation, College Futures, Kresge, and then our Community College Foundation is a grantee. So we benefit from all of these other groups. So these groups fund our system. So you can follow the money and see how we're all being funded by the corporate agenda. And a couple bits of analysis that I came up with when I was doing my homework is what I would call reformer dominance. And those 9 organizations I researched, and they have 9 boards, 1 per organization, 98 board members. Of all of those members, only 15% have had any experience within the California community colleges. So 85% of those are non-practitioners. They've never been a student in our system or a faculty, or they've never had anything to do with us, but they are making the decisions that are influencing the direction of our students in our system. And so I call this reformer hegemony, that their ideology has become dominant, sadly. And their ideology is that there should not be that education shouldn't be a public good, that we should be privatizing education. And the ideology of those of us who are passionate about the system and our students is that we need education to be a public good. We are absolutely, we need to invest in every person who wants a higher education should have that for free and be fully supported, and it is a human right. So you could see how these ideologies are conflicting and opposing each other. And basically the reformers have been changing our mission to the get in, get out degree factory. So a couple lessons from K-12 that I think can learn from and get some hope from, that they've created a vision for public education that is actually resonating. So they acknowledge the individuality of each student. They conceive of education far more broadly than just outcomes or degrees or completion. They are addressing the need for our students to grow in knowledge, critical thinking, character, civic engagement, lifelong learning, not just a get in, get out model. And their strategy has been public exposure and political action. And so they've built a giant local and national coalition of students, of faculty, of staff, administrators, community organizations, scholars, religious leaders, social justice organizations, unions, think tanks. They've been building coalition across a lot of different groups, and that's been working. They've had national civil rights organizations doing winning lawsuits, which are representing communities' rights to control public education, especially against the charter school movement, which has grown but now is shrinking again. So different civil rights organizations like the NAACP, the ACLU are working on behalf of this movement. Teacher strikes have been working. In 2018, we saw teachers go on strike across the nation: West Virginia, Oklahoma, Colorado, Arizona, California. And they basically changed this narrative that teachers were selfish or whatever those narratives are, to teaching the public that teachers we care about educating our students, and we love what we do, and our working conditions are our students' learning conditions. And so that's been winning. And then shining the light on dark money. So basically campaigns that have been to privatize education are coming out into the light, and a coalition of community members, again, and activists and scholars are kind of doing this work of revealing what's really happening. And then I wanted to just say a few words about some wins that we had last year in our system. Despite the reformers working against us, we actually fought for hard a bunch of money for our students. And here's what we ended up with in our budget. And this is all because we didn't expect a good state budget during the pandemic, but we got more of a budget than we expected. So we got money for college affordability and basic needs for students. So Cal Grant access, student housing, mental health resources, a lot more than that even. Money for diversity, equity, and inclusion. We've been wanting to diversify our faculty and our staff to reflect our students' backgrounds, ethnicity, and race, and to update the registry, which is how you register for classes, which you all know is not that easy. So we've got money for that now. Support for colleges, we got faculty support for groups like Umoja and Mesa and Puente and EOPS that serve specific student populations. We got money for our workforce and career education, and then pandemic recovery. So 4.1 billion is a lot for our system in 1 year. And it was because a bunch of us were working hard behind the scenes. And then we had a couple different legislation wins as well. Groups like FACCC, we write our own legislation based on our student feedback and our faculty needs. And this is in the last couple of years. 2 of these bills are now law. And it's not easy to get a bill all the way through the process and signed by the governor, but these were. And so 2 of these are focused on students and 1 on faculty. So the one on top, AB 706, part-time faculty can now take their sick leave with them from college to college, which is a retirement benefit. The next one allows districts to use lottery funds to provide housing and food assistance to students. And then the final one, which is just this year, requires county human services to liaison with our counselors. So if our students need legal services, housing, food, or mental health services, we can refer our students to the community for free. And then I thought I would give an example of a bill that none of us from inside the system, students included, wanted, but now we do have it because the reformers pushed it so hard. And basically it's AB 928, it's a transfer bill. The good news is that once you all learn how to opt out, you can opt out. But before you opt, so here's the bill. It takes away students' agency because it automatically places students in an associate degree for transfer, which is to attend a CSU. So even if you don't necessarily want that, you automatically get placed in that, which nobody in our system thought was a good idea, because it overlooks students who may not plan on transferring or whose goals are not to transfer to a UC or a private or out of state or anywhere. ADTs don't even guarantee admission to your local CSU. So it's not realistic to think that we can just move across the state to finish college in 2 years. That's what's happening. CSUs are highly impacted, and so you can't get in. Students can opt out, but you have to get the info. And then maybe there's a silver lining, because when this just happened, the governor just signed this bill, the chancellor's office was opposed to this bill And they were so surprised that even though we were all opposed to it, that it still passed. And so our own chancellor's office, we think, is having an aha moment where they see how powerful the reformers have been, that even if the chancellor's office, which regulates our system, is opposed, it doesn't matter. The reformers still win the day. And so maybe that's a wake-up call for the chancellor's office, and that can be good. And then we're stronger together. So as we're just thinking about building a resistance or figuring out what abolition looks like, we are strong together. We have 2.1 million students. We have 60,000 faculty. We have 28,000 classified professionals, 2,000 administrators. So we have the numbers if we can only maybe, hopefully, build a movement and redefine, reclaim, restructure our system to work for us. And then I won't go through all of this, but I wanted to mention this model of truth and reconciliation that comes from initially from South Africa, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, after apartheid was dismantled in South Africa in 1994. So basically this model of, it's a restorative or transformative justice model. And the idea is that truth has to be acknowledged by both sides. And before we can move on to recovery or forgiveness, we have to acknowledge the truth and what went wrong. And these are just some ideas I had for basically sitting at a table with all the stakeholders, students, faculty, everybody, and trying to figure out, well, what policies are not working? What is the reform, and what is this academic industrial complex about, and how can we move forward and move past the harm that it's been doing? And so this is my final slide, and it's next steps. And I'm really excited to hear from all of you what your thoughts are. But a question that I had for us to think through is, what counter narrative will win against the AIC, the academic industrial complex, and the reformer narrative of austerity and disinvesting from the public good? And to get us thinking, I thought I'd bring back our discussion of our values, our core values, to kind of brainstorm with each other, or at least just talk with each other about what we think our next steps could be. So that's really all I have. And I'm really thankful again for being able to be here with you today.
Yeah, how was it that breakout session? Were you just thinking, why am I not getting back to the main session? Yeah.
It was fun. We were having a great conversation.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay.
Yeah, but it would be awesome to hear some others too.
Yeah, I'm hoping people rejoin us, but we'll see. I think, like, just for the sake of time, should we just wait until 7:50 for people to join? And if not, we just talk amongst ourselves?
Sure.
Does that sound good? Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Or I could just share some feedback, because I know y'all probably talk extensively with each other.
Yeah.
All right, so then I'm gonna just check back in at 7:45, and hopefully more people join in.
All right.
Okay, thank you so much, Debbie. I know this is a lot, and I appreciate you so much.
No, it's my pleasure. I'm so happy to be here.
Thanks, Debbie.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll see folks at 7 in 1 minute. All right, so we're just gonna resume amongst ourselves. Debbie, would you want me to just give like a report back from my group?
Sure, I'd love it.
Okay, cool. So I was with Tatiana, Jacqueline, alongside with Sean, and then we talked about essentially how when we're discussing a new plan of attack per se, we really believe that having a abolitionist perspective is the way to go. I'm seeing a lot of people just, I guess, popularizing what abolition is. And as you sort of discuss and make it more publicly, have people more publicly aware about what the academic industrial complex is, I'm witnessing that students and faculty, or just all community members, are coming together to explore, like, how are we dismantling systems, but also particularly with the power systems at community colleges, because we can't, push to change certain policies or the student-centered funding formula when the people at the highest level, such as the Board of Governors or state chancellors, or at the local level, the Board of Trustees, they keep doing the same neoliberal BS,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Yeah. And this is something that we want to explore also on Wednesday, which is this idea of how are we moving away from state power or the politicians from running the show, and have it be community powered instead. Like,
Yes.
yeah. So that's what we mentioned. And I'm
Yeah.
curious to hear what your group said.
Oh, that's so good. That's so great. So thank you for sharing that, and for having that conversation, and continuing to build on it on Wednesday or whenever next. Yeah, in many ways. Well, Brianna and Matthew, you are here. Do you want to jump in since I've been talking a whole bunch? Maybe.
No, feel free to take it.
You sure? Brianna?
Yeah, absolutely.
If you want me to, I'll share. But
Yes, I do. Thanks.
So we talked a lot. So basically we reflected about City College, and I shared stories, Matthew shared stories. We connected with some of the experiences with Debbie, and we talked about how sometimes it's really problematic, the different political parties that have agendas, and how it feels like it's so divisive in how we're fighting for against the AIC. And it's this, the narrative of we're all fighting for crumbs, and then we're not stepping back and looking at, or we're not looking at the bigger picture. And so we kind of dissected that a lot and had a lot of different personal experiences and discussions of thoughts and how we connected. And then one of my favorite things is that we talked about potentially, like, what do we do next? And so we kind of talked, Debbie suggested having a group, right? And where we continue these fights and we continue these conversations on a larger level, right? Because as she brilliantly talked about, right, strength in numbers. And so really doing that. And we all were supportive, and it was a really healing and affirming, like, validating group discussion.
Thanks, Brianna, for sharing that. I hear that it's oftentimes going back to this idea of, like, creating that coalition. And I'm curious over what people think are the steps to that. Matthew, I haven't heard a lot from you, and I hope I'm not putting you on the spot, but I'd love to also hear your perspective or your opinions on this. Oh, Matthew, you're muted.
Sorry, sometimes when the chat's up, I just put a bunch of spaces in the chat instead of unmuting myself temporarily. No, you're not putting me on the spot at all, and thank you for the opportunity to chat. I think just to echo a little bit is for me personally, I think it's just a values issue. And I think what I appreciate so much about this class, this course, and the political education is that, whether or not you agree wholeheartedly with radical perspectives, so-called radical perspectives, I think that, like, once you open your eyes to this sort of like structural existence, the system, for lack of a better word, around you, it's hard to kind of like go back to closing your eyes to it. So yeah, I think for me, that's just the biggest thing is helping people understand how they could benefit, I guess, from like a shift in values.
Nice, I see. Thank you, Matthew. Debbie, I was wondering what your takeaways were from the conversation, like especially as someone that's from FACCC. Does that sort of make you think about planting certain seeds with the other people that you work with?
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Thank you for also for this opportunity for reflection and for meeting everybody here. And I just, yes. So let's see. Well, also just echoing what Brianna and Matthew were saying, I also felt like our conversation was healing in the sense that I think we feel, I think it, when you're struggling, like a lot of us are, whether we're students or faculty or you know, have some connection to our community colleges, I don't think we can not be struggling right now because of what all these messages are. They're messages or actual conditions that we're trying to work and learn in. So it just helps to connect with each other, just, you know, share our stories of struggle, or share, like Brianna talked about her LGBTQ classes and how, you know, we talked about lifelong learning students. That sticks with me from our conversation, and how, like, why are we, well, for what, how important, we're all lifelong learners. We all are. And, you know, why would we not want to support lifelong learning in our system? Because that's sort of who we are as people seeking education, you know, and we should, and how important the 60s, the older returned students are for the LGBTQ classes, and how valuable, you know, just education is for people who return to school or change careers or retool or reskill or whatever it is. So just that was just one example of how important it is, I think, to just remind each other of who we are, what we care about. And also, oh yeah, back to Matthew, your point about the values, you know, just loving. I kept saying just to out loud, we have something worth fighting for. You know, what we are offering to our students and to ourselves as community. We're community college. So like counter narrative wise, I think I said, you know, put the community back into the community colleges, like to your era, your groups. Like, how can we become a community? How can our communities reclaim, you know, our structures? And, you know, do we burn the house down? And, you know, this stupid chancellor's office and the board of governors, they're so out of touch. They just really are. Most of them have never even set foot on, I mean, they have set foot on a campus because they do that to prove that it's so silly. They visit all these campuses, but they've never taken classes, and they've never taught. You know, they just don't know what they're talking about, and they're making decisions. And it's just it does that abolitionist perspective that I understand. It makes me want to just, you know, get them out. You know, get that regulatory body that is the chancellor's office. How sorry, I'm a little hoarse, but how can we imagine our system without that? I would, you know, that's just, I would love to do that. And I remember my first day on the job as president, it was like my second day. FAC had just taken a vote of no confidence in the chancellor's office, and I made the motion, and, you know, my colleagues at the table were not all, I mean, it was a unanimous vote, but it was controversial. And then I, as the new president, had to go and face Eloy, who, you know, we had just taken that. It was such a hard conversation. And Eloy just, I actually like Eloy as a person. I think he's a fine person, but who he represents and what he does, he's bought the reform agenda, and he's a proponent of it. So it's a problem. And so I was just trying to be respectful of him and talk to him about, you know, the fact that the chancellor's office, I shouldn't have probably said this, but they're a regulatory body like Fish and Wildlife, you know, can't can they imagine themselves not becoming a corporate, pushing a corporate agenda on an entire system when they're just supposed to regulate us and help us do what we do best? Instead, they have this whole politicized, we know that the academic industrial complex is what they have become. And he was horrified at what I was saying. And he just made, and it was a really bad conversation. It was an awkward conversation. So that was me as a new, trying to speak truth to power, I guess. And it didn't go very well. And so I guess I'm trying, and I was in a seat of power myself, which I didn't occupy very gracefully at the time, or it's hard, it's weird. But anyway, I guess I'm just thinking like about next steps and what that looks like. But I would love to see our students and our faculty and our staff join together and take back our system, And I think we're so important to our communities.
Thank you so much, Debbie. It's so clear how you are dedicated and committed to community colleges. I so appreciate that. Something that sort of ties in together what everything was mentioned, Matthew with the values, Debbie with what you're talking about, counter narratives, and what Brianna mentioned regarding like a healing aspect of it is we have this potential project called Abolition as Reflection. And the idea was to get our cohort members to sort of submit their own interpretations of a self-determined abolitionist education. And that would be compiled into a zine. And we were thinking of talking to AK Press Distro, which is an anarchist press publisher, and having them publish that zine. And that's like a literal way of sort of spreading out the narrative.
Yeah.
And like, how are we creating that? And I'm very curious to explore. And I think we have the most power on a local level. And when we think about coming together as a group, one of the bases should be that question of how are we pursuing these things with the mindset that the power should be with us and not feeding into like the politicians and the BS with that. Yeah. Okay. So I know we have 3 more minutes, and I'm wondering if people have any questions or any last comments before we end the session.
Something that just keeps resonating with me as I hear everybody talking is this, and I love this zine idea, it's so good, is the idea of just that we need, I think we need to educate ourselves, continue to learn our own history. And I'm learning, the presentation, I am still learning everything I can. And, Era, your framework of the academic industrial complex, as you know, kind of pushed me to kind of understand it even in that framework of what we're working in, and just be even beyond the corporate, it's this relationships, all of these, it's this giant machine, this complex that we are dealing with. And I think the more we understand about that, and we were kind of talking about this in our group, I think the more I think we can get our messaging down and start building community and getting our own colleagues. Brianna was talking about the Rebuild City thing in the spring and how there was such division that was happening among the faculty and even probably all groups on campus staff, and how sad that, I'm saying that it doesn't need to be that way, but it reflects, I think, our lack of understanding of how this complex is pitting us against each other when we should be joining hands. And there's this big picture that I think doesn't serve anybody. And if we can just see how we're all part of that, if we can understand it, we can fight against it. But I think a lot of us just don't understand it yet. And me included, I'm still learning, but I think it's worth trying to understand more and more.
Thank you, Debbie. And I'm wondering if Brianna and Matthew, any of you have any closing comments as well. And thank you for beautifully wrapping that up too, Debbie.
I'm just so grateful. Thank you so much, Debbie. Thank you all for organizing this. This class is amazing. I'm so inspired. Every class, especially this one. So thank you all.
Thanks, Brianna and Matthew. Sorry, this is like a little bit weird. We're just like in a very intimate group, so I felt appropriate to close out with everyone. But if Matthew have any closing thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I have so many thoughts and none of them are closing. They're all expanding and opening. And yeah, just gratitude. Thank you so much. This is just a great oasis for me to come to all the time, to just be inspired and just floored constantly and broken open. And yeah, it's just amazing. So thank you so much.